Hi everyone. So we're going to go over Chapter 1 for NTR445, but before I get into the first chapter of this actual material, I did want to go over a few things that will be helpful tools for you and some information really for this class and moving forward in regards to note-taking. You probably have noticed I have provided a skeletal outline on Canvas. Looks something like this. It allows you to follow along with the PowerPoint presentation, but not the actual slides themselves, and allows you to write in the information as I review it. Why would I do this? Well, a little bit of information about note-taking. I know a lot of you are probably most familiar or are most routinely take notes on your computer or your laptop, maybe directly on the PowerPoint slides or in a separate document. But what we find, and research has shown, is that when you're really just physically typing, you're becoming more of a transcriber and you're not really understanding or learning that information that you're writing down. So studies have shown that when you actually physically write in your own handwriting notes, you will retain them better. So in this quote, the ability to take in information, make it one's own by processing it, restructuring it, presenting it in a form that can be understood, is one of those basic skills. And we find that we really can do that when we take really good notes. And handwriting those notes, which I know many of you are probably groaning inside that, or you're never going to handwrite notes. It is painful, I understand, but you actually retain more of that information and learn more of that information if you handwrite it. So some studies show that 11% of lecture is typically captured in the first year of college students' notes, and this is if it's typed. Even the best students usually only capture about 3/4 of a lecture. So how can we remember it all? Well, some of the findings that have been reviewed are during a 20-minute lecture, you can usually get around 70% of what's presented in the first 10 minutes, but then as the lecture goes on, you retain less. And that's where it becomes more and more crucial to take notes. As we get tired and as our brain fatigues, we can take those notes to be able to refer back to in the future. And I know this is a comment that I get many semesters, and I observe this. Particularly when we were in person, I would have students come and just listen. I don't really need to take notes. I just listen. Well, that may be good in that time period, but really your ability to retain that information long term decreases over time. And most exams in any class don't happen within the next day of obtaining that information. So it's not going to be as fresh in your brain. Maybe even 2 weeks, and as you see here on the screen, you recall less and less as time goes on. 50% after the first day, 35% after the first week, 20% after 2 weeks. In some exams, you may have a whole month between when that topic was discussed or introduced until the time that it's actually provided on an exam. So taking good notes is really critical. Quality of notes taken during a lecture has really a direct relationship to the retention of that material. And the skeletal outlines that I'm providing you, is the intent of those is to provide you that framework to take good quality notes. The more important information, those things that I've highlighted for you on those skeletal outlines, has a higher chance of being remembered, is essentially what this slide is saying. Okay. A lot of students will say, I just have to copy what my teacher writes. Well, this says on the board, but off of the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see my PowerPoints are not a lot of text. We have a lot of visuals. There are different shapes and things that are utilized. There is text on there, but you're going to need to take notes in order to be able to retain the information that's covered, because I give you a lot of times it's just bullet points or word, or a single word to describe a concept. So before your class, review notes. During our review your content. Review the textbook, take a look at the skeletal outline prior to coming to class to kind of get an idea of what we're going to be talking about. during class, write them as legibly as you can. I get it. If you have to type. I think you're going to find it to your benefit to handwrite them. Underline keywords as you need to. Listen for keywords I like to use. This is an important topic. We'll be reviewing this. This will be on the exam, and usually even just as bold as that. I will try to provide you handouts when we get to some of the more complicated information, and ask questions, of course. Best practices after class: reread your notes, review, and then ask more questions, and keep reviewing them as the exams get closer. And if you're having trouble taking notes, just ask questions. Talk to me. I'm more than happy to clarify points, slow down. I have a tendency to talk fast. You guys probably have picked up on that. So if I need to slow down, please let me know. For recorded lectures such as this, it's just a matter of pausing, rewinding. That's one of the lovely things of recorded recorded lectures, to be able to review and go back and re-listen to. So there's my soapbox for note taking. I will provide a skeleton outline just like this for the first portion of our lectures until exam 1, and we'll see how it goes from there and see what your feedback is. If you think these are helpful for you, I'll provide more for the rest of the remaining content. Just to let you guys know that after exam 1, we get into more of the management aspects, chapter 9, marketing in chapter 14, human resources. We do more case studies. We do more interaction in the class rather than me just providing the lecture and you having skeletal outlines. So it changes the dynamic of the lecture time period a little bit more. So you might find benefit of having skeletal notes to take to listen to lectures on your own time to get prepared for class. So we'll address that as we get a little bit closer to that time period. So with that, let's talk about chapter 1. This is pretty much an introduction of what we're going to be talking about for the course of this semester. Chapter 1 is all about the introduction and the terminology of systems. So this is just a brief introduction of systems. This isn't anything that you all need to take notes on. As you notice, your skeletal outline doesn't really say, it wants a definition of systems, but for here I'm kind of giving you some context, okay? A lot of different things we can think about when we talk about the word system. Solar system, defense system, our human body is a system. And if you think about it, it's just a series of different pieces and parts that are combined together to do something. Okay, whether that's to keep you alive, whether that's to provide education in a school system, whatever it is, there's usually some function behind that series or gathering of parts. Here is the true goal, or the true terminology or definition, I should say, of system. It's a set of independent parts that work together to achieve a common goal. Okay, so that's your textbook answer that you'd want to use for your system definition. So a little bit of evolution, and this isn't anything that you need to write down. This is just giving you a little context and history of how we think of systems and how they've evolved over the course of the years. So in the traditional theory of systems, back in the early 20th century, we as workers were trained to do something one way, the best way. Obviously this has some problems. If you're not happy with that way or you think it's not as productive, potentially there could be problems with execution, people not following it. So that evolved into management theory, where we focus on really looking at the data behind it. Well, if we do it this one way, how efficient are we? How many items are we producing? So it's using more of those, the data to support your ideas or your methods. And so, granted, that's just one piece, right? So systems theory kind of looks at all of it, how the data impact, but how you are satisfied in your own position, or you as the human doing this work. How efficient are you? How satisfied? How productive are you doing this work? And then it also looks at how you're impacting other areas within that system. So, this is assuming that performance can be really improved by aligning, and we're looking at the mission and the goals of the company, but also taking into account the area, the environment. If you're not happy working at a desk, are you able to move about your organization and get your job done still, or do you have to be tied to a computer? Okay, things like that. There might be some constraints with what you need to have around you to do your job. So this is your, goes back into probably the PowerPoints that you've seen on Canvas. The systems concept, where really a system is designed to accomplish an objective. And in food service, which I will bring in obviously throughout this semester, this is a food service management course, but some of the management topics that we talk about do flow over into other organizations, not just food service. So in food service, obviously, our objective is to feed customers. Subsystems of a system have some established arrangements, meaning in a food service environment, you have maybe a receiving area or unit, and so they're in charge of receiving all of the product and storing it at a proper temperature. Okay, they have basically arrangements made that they receive the product and then they distribute it out to the different entities that need that product. But there are obviously some relationships that exist, right? There needs to be some communication. They function and talk with one another. As you guys are beginning to realize, food service is not an island, right? You can't do this by yourself. And then we look at the flow of the resources through the system. How do we produce that objective? And then what's the process of that objective being made? And that whole process itself, not just necessarily one individual, but how does the process work? That's important. And then we look at the overall organizational objectives. What is it we're trying to achieve? So maybe if I'm in the receiving department, my subsystem's goal or my unit's goal is to receive items within 20 minutes that it hits the dock and have the cold items put away within that time period. Granted, that's important, but it's not more important than maybe feeding hungry kids and ensuring that you feed healthy items to your customers. Okay. So you have the schematic on your skeletal outline. So you might want to pause here and just take some notes on the different items here. We are going to come back to this over and over again this semester. We're going to focus a lot on that transformation process in the middle. But in food service, you have inputs and outputs. So your inputs is anything you put into the system. So in this instance, we have human labor, materials such as food or supplies, you have facilities, and money, time, all those kinds of things. The output is what you create with all of those. So meals, quantity and quality, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction is another good one, an important one, and financial accountability. There are some things that oversee this system, such as your controls. So these are plans. This might be some federal regulations, some laws that are in place. So in food service, we definitely have health codes and health laws that we have to abide by. So those would all kind of oversee and dictate the model or that transformation process. Okay, and then the memory is really records that you have, what has happened in the past, and how that can help you plan for the future. And as you'll notice, it's all kind of a feedback system. There's some environmental factors at play, which we'll talk about as the semester progresses, that can influence any one of these areas. Okay. So this is figure 1.4 in your text, by the way. You can always refer to that. Let's talk a little bit about open systems and some characteristics. There is some interdependency on one another. So accounting depends on receiving. Receiving depends on purchasing to order their items correctly. But they, will work together, and that working together is also known as synergy, right? You can achieve more together than you can by yourself. The definition of synergy. Achieving more together than you could by yourself or as your single department. But there's also some equilibrium that's happening, right? In food service, there's always a shift, whether you have a lack of product coming in, something was ordered and not received, there is an employee out ill, that maybe the cook is ill and so you have to compensate for that missing individual. There's always some sort of unbalance that will have to be rebalanced in order for the objective to be completed. Equifinality. Equifinality is basically creating or having the same endpoint, but doing it in two different ways. You guys might remember this from purchasing when you did make, buy. Do I make that item from scratch or do I buy it already made? Okay, so I have lasagna. I either buy all the ingredients for lasagna and pay somebody to make that, or I buy a frozen lasagna and put it in the oven. The end product is still the same, lasagna, but how I got there was a little bit different. So food service is all about equifinality. There's lots of different ways to go about it, and it's just a matter of how management and the food service operation decides to make those products. There are some permeable boundaries, meaning some responsibilities and things that affect one another may creep into other departments. So if receiving didn't receive an item that the procurement department ordered or purchasing ordered, there's some responsibility there for communicating that information, getting credit for that, and lack of product. There's some responsibility from receiving to communicate that with purchasing and taking responsibility for some of that information or product missing. Okay, money really. But it's basically all about communication and interface, talking to one another. In most systems, there is some kind of hierarchy. Those that make decisions, plans, strategies, and then those that implement them. Okay. Oftentimes those planning pieces or the strategies done for higher management levels, CEOs, management, supervisors, where those that execute it are those entry-level workers. So there are some steps in the strategic management process. So those involved in making those plans, those higher level entities, those managers, oftentimes are heavily involved in that visioning, trying to figure out, okay, where are we right now as an organization and where do we want to go and how do we get there? And then continually evaluating that. So part of the strategic management process is called a SWOT analysis, SWOT, or strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Part of that analysis or that SWOT analysis, you develop, okay, what is our company's mission, our vision? What are our threats that are out there and opportunities, and where can we see growth? Okay, you look at your environment. Who are your stakeholders? Who are your threats? Who are your competition? What are they doing? So you look at all of that and then you develop a strategy. Okay, where do we want to go? How do we want to improve? What is it that we want to achieve? And we'll talk about a couple of those strategies in just a second. And then with every good, strategic plan, you evaluate how well are we doing? Are we meeting our goals and objectives? What do we need to tweak to make sure that we're meeting those? And if we are meeting those, what new things can we develop or create for goals to improve our company? Okay, let's talk a little bit about those environmental threats. This is from table 1.1 out of your text. So a couple different threats, particularly for food service as a new business or a new entry into the market. And this is another business that might be competing for your customers. Okay, a rivalry, which is an existing business already there that you are competing with continuously. The most common one in food service would be any franchise. So a McDonald's versus Burger King, or Arby's versus, Chick-fil-A, or whatever it happens to be. But they're always one-upping each other or creating new specials or new products to be able to compete and to draw their customers into their organization compared to the other. Some other threats, substitutions. So if you have an item or an ingredient that is no longer available, and it was really a customer favorite and you have to substitute that out, it may cause problems or it may cause dissatisfaction with customers. You may have experienced this. Go to a restaurant you love a certain item and then for whatever reason it gets discontinued or it changes and it just doesn't taste the same, you're disappointed as a customer, and maybe so much so that you don't come back. So that's really a threat to a business. If they have a really special menu item that many customers like and they can no longer make it, it can cause some serious issues with cash flow and revenue in the future. Suppliers. These suppliers control price of product, quality of items, again, whether they can provide you an item. They are an ally, but they also can be a threat depending on the type of products that you need and the relationship that you have and how reliable they are. And last, a threat to the business is a buyer. They control all of their purchasing decisions, right? So you have to make sure that you are pleasing your customer, you're meeting the market demands, you're staying on top of trends and what customers want, because they're the ultimate decider in whether or not they partake in your business. So how to implement your business. There's a couple different strategies with how you'd want to think about opening, and we're going to talk really specifically more for food service. Okay, there's a way to implement a business called cost leadership. And the best way I can describe this is you focus and really market your items to your customers based on a low cost. So you want to be the leader in low costs for your type of business. So as an example, say I have a sandwich shop. If I'm going to implement a cost leadership, as the sandwich shop, I'm going to provide very low cost sandwich items. They're going to be of decent quality, but maybe not the best. Maybe there won't be a large variety, but I'm going to offer these sandwiches at such a deal that I'm hoping to draw customers in just based on price alone. Okay. Another strategy is differentiation. So instead of cost, I'm going to look at being unique. I'm going to look at being different to draw my customer base in. So using that same sandwich shop analogy, now instead of having low product or low cost products in my differentiation sandwich shop, I'm going to make unique sandwiches. I'm going to have organic bread. I'm going to have free range meats. I'm going to have organic produce that's put on it, on the product. Maybe I'm going to have gluten-free bread. I'm going to have a little bit higher end unique items. I'm going to probably have to charge more, but I'm hoping that people will come just based on the fact that I have some different items to provide them. The last one is focus. So it's going to take either that cost leadership, so the low cost item, or differentiation, unique items, but it's going to really narrow the focus to a specific population. So say I take that cost leadership, those really low cost sandwiches, but I'm going to focus it to a K through 12 lunch population. I'm going to have the cheapest sandwiches available for these K through 12 kids, hoping that their parents would be interested in buying these low cost items for their kids for lunch. Okay. As you can probably imagine, there are some challenges to this. If you target the wrong market, or you target a market, an area that isn't interested in your product, you're no longer going to have a business. So you have to be very careful and mindful if you go with a focus strategy to ensure that they're going to want your product. Let's talk a little bit about different types of food service entities. There's commercial and on-site. The goal of commercial food service is to make money. And I'm going to give you some examples of what those are in just a minute. On-site, sometimes called institutional, their goal is really to serve a population at that location and not looking at revenue. Okay, so here's some examples of commercial. This is essentially kind of any restaurant that you would go out to eat at, limited service, full service, airport restaurants, museums, sporting events, convenience stores. They're there really to provide the customer an item and make some money off of it. So a retail operation is another way to think of it. On-site, these are entities or organizations that are there for other reasons besides feeding individuals. So such as a hospital, a school. So you maybe would go to a hospital because you're visiting a loved one, but you don't necessarily go there to eat, right? That's not your main idea of like, hey, where we want to go to eat Friday night? Let's go to Mercy Gilbert, right? That's not the case. But maybe while you're there visiting a loved one, you would want to maybe pick up something to eat while you're waiting for them to get out of surgery, okay? So they understand that their population is captive, doing whatever it is that they're doing there, but they might get hungry and they might need to eat. So like here at ASU, you guys don't come here just to eat, I hope, right? You're here for learning opportunities, but while you're here, you might get hungry, and so we'll feed you while you're here. So examples, hospitals, as I mentioned, schools, K through 12, child care, senior care, jails. Okay, these are all considered on-site food service. There are entities that are there for other reasons, but they're going to feed you while you're there. All right, some different operating practices. So you can have retail for profit or on-site nonprofit, but they operate from different management perspectives. Okay, so self-operation is essentially management owns the entirety, and they make all of the decisions from what they have on the menu, how that's purchased, who they hire, who they fire, the whole 9 yards. They run it all. Okay, so think of like a mom and pop restaurant. That's self-operating. You could have something like partnering, so where you have maybe a retail operation and maybe another for-profit institution. So let's say I have a KFC next or housed inside a gas station. Some of you guys may have seen this if you've ever, back when we actually had road trips. You go and you stop and get gas, and there may be a Subway inside the gas station. They're sharing some retail space, but they're drawing in the customers, hoping that if you need gas, you'll eat, or maybe you're hungry and maybe you'll get gas while you're there. Contracting is essentially hiring a business to operate your food service entity. Contracting is very common in institutional feedings or on-site feedings. So here at ASU, we have a contract, I believe it's Aramark, sometimes it's Sodexo, I can never remember. But it's Aramark, Sodexo are kind of your common ones that their expertise, their business model is to provide food service. So they get hired by a large entity like ASU or say a high school or a K through 12 district. And they come in and run the food service operation for that district. But they charge the entity to do that. So they may charge a monthly fee, they may charge a per meal fee depending on how they have the contract set up. But they take care of all of the nuances. So they hire the employees, they write the menus, they order all the food, they do everything and feed the population that's on that location. So you won't see this happen in retail environments, right? Like this KFC is never going to hire, Sodexo or Aramark to come run their operation. You'd only see this in on-site, like hospitals are very familiar with contracting, schools, universities, and such. Franchising is probably one most of you are familiar with. So normal, common franchise, McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, they're owned by a large entity. That franchise dictates the type of items that are sold, the way that they're produced, the locations that they're in. They have a lot of control over the actual operation of the business. And then multi-department management. This happens most often in hospital environments, so where you might have the clinical dietitians have a part of an oversight in the food operation or food service operation of the hospital. They have some oversight over maybe formulary or types of diets that are on the menu. They may have some oversight of the employees, but they don't have complete oversight of the food service operation. They just might have some say or some input there. So there's a couple different departments essentially that are running that food service organization. This is not very common. Honestly, the only time I've ever seen it true is in a hospital environment. Okay. And then let's talk a little bit about sustainability in a food service operation and really in any business. And I think when we think about sustainability, we think about from a green perspective or an ecological perspective, saving the earth, right? So in a retail or a food service operation, this can be accomplished by using compostable materials, using Energy Star equipment, things that reduce the amount of water that's used. So overall, maybe being really energy efficient. But also, to be sustainable as an organization, you need to be mindful of being socially acceptable and what products you're providing and maybe where you're located. So if I was, I give this example, if I was an owner and operator of a Hooters location, I may not want to build my next location next to an elementary school, right? Probably not the demographic I'm going after if I'm running a Hooters operation, and may not be seen socially acceptable to the population in the area next to that school. So you just kind of have to be mindful of what your customers and where you're located and how you're viewed in that regard. And last is economically viable. How are you paying your employees? Are you paying them a livable wage? This has been obviously a point of discussion for quite some time. There's a discussion about increasing the minimum wage nationwide because of the fact that it's difficult to really be able to survive or have a livable wage when you're making a minimum wage of less than, I don't know, $10 an hour or less than $15 an hour. So to be sustainable, to be able to keep people in your organization, to keep workers, in food service, you need a fair amount of individuals. In order to keep them and for them to stay, you need to pay them a livable wage. But then you also need to be able to charge an amount to your customers that's also, appropriate and realistic and not price gouging your customers. So you have to be kind of careful and with balancing the two. All right, that's all for Chapter 1.